Tonight, the first topic we explore is the life and ideas of Albert Einstein, perhaps the most iconic physicist in modern history. A man whose wild hair and deep eyes became symbols of genius itself. From redefining our understanding of space and time to his quiet resistance against war and injustice, Einstein's life was filled with curiosity, rebellion, and moments of deep reflection. So before you get comfortable, as always, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel only if you enjoy our content. Also, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Sometimes our stories are too interesting and we're working on some boring ones. It's time now to dim the lights, turn on a fan for some noise, and let's cover what we have for tonight together. Albert Einstein was born on a quiet spring day, March 14, 1879, in the small German city of Ulm. He was not born into grandeur or wealth, but into the hum of ordinary life. His father, Hermann, was an engineer, and his mother, Pauline, was a gifted pianist. Their home was filled with a gentle mix of tools and melodies, science and art. An atmosphere that would quietly shape the boy who would one day change how we understand the universe. From the very beginning, Albert was different. Not in the way people might expect genius to show itself. He was slow to speak. Some in his family feared he never would. He often repeated sentences softly to himself under his breath, as if trying to make sense of the words before releasing them into the world. But what he lacked in speech, he made up for in stillness. An intense, quiet curiosity that seemed to absorb everything around him. One day, when he was about 5 years old and homesick in bed, his father gave him a simple gift to cheer him up. A pocket compass, just a tiny object with a small needle suspended in a glass case. But for Albert, it was a moment of revelation. He held the compass in his small hand, tilted it, turned it, studied it. No matter what he did, the needle moved, always pointing north. Something invisible was moving it. Something he couldn't see or touch or hear, but something that was there. He became obsessed. How could the needle know which way was north? What force could reach across space and command it like that? The mystery burrowed into his young mind and never left. Later, Einstein would call this his first wonder. The moment he realized that the universe had laws, patterns, secrets, and he wanted to spend his life uncovering them. That compass didn't just point north. It pointed forward. It was the beginning of a journey that would carry Einstein across continents through revolutions in thought and into the minds of generations to come. Long before chalkboards and equations, it all began with a boy, a fever, and a tiny needle dancing in still air. Albert Einstein's early school years were anything but brilliant. In fact, if you had been one of his teachers, you might never have guessed you were looking at a future icon of genius. He didn't behave poorly, but he didn't exactly follow the rules either. He didn't sit up straight with excitement. He didn't memorize the answers like the others. What he did, often quietly, inwardly, was think. He would let his mind wander. And in classrooms where conformity was king, that made him a misfit. In late 19th century Germany, the school system was strict, even militaristic. Lessons were rigid. Students recited by rote. Creativity was not rewarded. It was discouraged. But Albert was not interested in memorizing what others had already discovered. He wanted to understand the why. Why did light behave the way it did? Why was the sky blue? Why did time feel slower when you were bored and faster when you were playing? These weren't questions that earned you gold stars. They earned you raised eyebrows. His teachers, frustrated with his questions and quiet resistance, often saw him as defiant. One famously told him he would never amount to anything. Another asked him to leave school altogether. But at home, Einstein was a different student. He devoured books on his own, books about physics, mathematics, and philosophy. He discovered Euclidean geometry before most of his classmates even heard the word theorem. At the age of 12, he began teaching himself algebra and calculus. Not for grades. Not for praise. Just for the sheer joy of unraveling the universe. He also found peace in music. His mother, Pauline, had introduced him to the violin early on. At first, he resisted it. But as he grew older, music became a refuge. He loved Mozart most of all. Playing the violin calmed him, gave him rhythm when the world felt chaotic. He once said that if he hadn't been a physicist, he might have become a musician. So, while the classroom tried to box him in, Albert quietly made his own world. A world filled with questions, symbols, silence, and sound. He wasn't failing. He was just waiting for the right kind of challenge. And soon, it would arrive. By the time Albert Einstein finished his studies at the Polytechnic Institute in Zurich, he had the knowledge, but not the path. The world didn't seem to know what to do with him. He graduated without distinction, without glowing letters of recommendation. His professors didn't quite know how to categorize him. He was brilliant, yes, but unconventional, stubborn, and always questioning. He applied for teaching positions across Europe, rejected again and again. At times, it seemed as though no one wanted him. For over 2 years, Einstein drifted in what he later called his wasted years. But they weren't wasted. Not really. They were the quiet before the storm. The waiting period before genius would be ready to speak. Eventually, a friend helped him secure a job at the Swiss Patent Office in Bern. Not as a physicist. Not even as a teacher. He was a clerk. He reviewed patent applications for electromagnetic devices and small mechanical inventions. It was far from glamorous, but it was stable. And more importantly, it was quiet. That silence gave him space. While others saw a dull government job, Einstein saw opportunity. The work was mechanical and repetitive, but that left his mind free. He used scraps of paper and the backs of applications to scribble ideas. He took long walks along the Aare River, thinking through puzzles most people never even asked. And late at night, after returning to his modest apartment, he'd continue to dream. No laboratory. No team. Just Albert, his thoughts, and the ticking clock. During this time, he also fell in love with Maliva Merrick, a fellow physics student from Zurich. Their relationship was passionate but complicated. They would eventually marry, and their union would bear children, but also deep strain. Einstein was still searching for himself, still becoming who he would one day be. And marriage, for all its comfort, added new pressures. But through it all, one thing remained constant: Albert's obsession with light. He imagined riding on a beam of light, wondering what the world would look like from that impossible perspective. That single thought, born in obscurity, shaped during his lonely patent office years, would soon unlock one of the greatest revolutions in human thought. The world didn't see him yet, but he was almost ready. The year was 1905. Albert Einstein was 26 years old, working full-time at the Swiss Patent Office in Bern. By day, he reviewed designs for inventions. By night, he turned to the questions that haunted him. And that year, quietly, without fanfare, he rewrote the laws of physics. Historians call it his annus mirabilis, his miracle year. In the span of just 12 months, Einstein published 4 scientific papers. Not forgettable footnotes. Not minor tweaks. Each paper fundamentally altered how we understand reality. The paper explained the photoelectric effect. It showed that light wasn't just a wave. It could act like a particle, too. This was the beginning of quantum theory, a strange and radical field that would later unsettle even himself. His ideas helped others eventually develop technologies like solar panels, lasers, and even the foundations of modern computing. The second paper confirmed the existence of atoms. At the time, atoms were still considered theoretical. Many scientists weren't even convinced they were real. But Einstein, through statistical calculations, showed how their motion could explain the behavior of particles suspended in liquid. Suddenly, the invisible world of atoms had a doorway, and Albert had opened it. The third paper was about special relativity. In it, Einstein proposed something astonishing: that space and time are not fixed. They bend, they stretch. They change depending on how fast you're moving. Imagine two people, one standing still and one speeding through space. Their clocks would tick at different rates. The faster you move, the slower time becomes. Reality, it seemed, was more fluid than anyone had dared to think. And then came the fourth paper, just a few pages long, a quiet bombshell. In it, he introduced a simple formula, E equals mc squared. Energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. That one equation showed that matter and energy were interchangeable. A single drop of mass held unimaginable energy. A principle that would later power stars, fuel nuclear energy, and awaken terrifying possibilities. And all of this from a man with no university position, no laboratory, and no assistant. Just a pen, a desk, and a relentless imagination. The scientific world barely knew what had hit it. But in that modest little office, a revolution had begun, and nothing would ever be the same again. In 1919, the world changed for Albert Einstein. Not because of a new discovery, but because the world finally saw what he had already revealed. That year, British astronomer Sir Arthur Eddington led an expedition to observe a solar eclipse. During the eclipse, stars that passed near the sun appeared to shift their positions ever so slightly, the bending of light around a massive object, just as Einstein's theory of general relativity had predicted. The newspapers seized it with both hands. One headline shouted, "Lights all askew in the heavens." Overnight, Einstein went from an obscure patent clerk turned physicist to a household name. Not just in Germany. Not just in scientific circles. Everywhere. He became the first global celebrity of science. Reporters followed him. Crowds gathered at his lectures. His face appeared in magazines and newspapers, often paired with the mysterious formula E equals mc superscript 2, even if most people didn't quite understand what it meant. But fame was never what Einstein wanted. He found it odd, exhausting even. Strangers stopped him in the street. Letters poured in by the hundreds, questions, compliments, theories, and pleas. He was amused by it, but also overwhelmed. He once said that being a celebrity made him feel like an exotic animal in a zoo. Beneath the public spotlight, Einstein remained who he had always been, an introvert, a thinker, a wanderer of ideas. While people gathered to hear him speak, he preferred walking alone or playing his violin in a quiet room. He loved to sail, even though he wasn't very good at it. The water, like the universe, gave him space to drift. In private, he continued to work tirelessly. He was still chasing the deepest truths of reality, still asking questions no one else dared to ask. But now there were distractions, ceremonies, honors, and obligations. The world wanted more from him than just science. They wanted a voice, a leader, a symbol. Einstein obliged, to a point. But deep down, he missed the obscurity of Bern, the stillness of the patent office, the purity of thought untouched by fame. In many ways, the loner who had imagined riding on a beam of light now lived under a spotlight too bright for comfort. And yet, through it all, his mind never stopped asking why. As the world marched toward chaos in the early 20th century, Albert Einstein stood apart, not just as a scientist, but as a voice of conscience. The horrors of World War I deeply disturbed him. The glorification of violence, the blind loyalty to flags, the endless rows of young men sent to die. It was all senseless to him. He was not just against war, he was broken by it. While many German intellectuals signed declarations supporting the war, Einstein refused. He co-authored a counter-manifesto, though it went largely ignored. It didn't matter. He believed that silence in the face of violence was a form of betrayal. And from then on, he spoke more openly about the need for peace, understanding, and global cooperation. After the war, Einstein's beliefs began to evolve even further. He became increasingly engaged with political issues, not because he sought power, but because he couldn't bear to watch humanity destroy itself. He saw nationalism as a poison. Racism, inequality, and militarism disturbed him deeply. He began to speak out for pacifism, Zionism, and civil rights, ideas that made him both admired and hated. And then came the rise of Adolf Hitler. As anti-Semitism spread like wildfire through Germany, Einstein knew he had to leave. His home, his country, his reputation, none of it was safe. In 1933, he renounced his German citizenship and accepted a position at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, New Jersey. There, in quiet exile, he would spend the rest of his life. But peace didn't follow him. Across the ocean, the Nazi regime was growing bolder. And the threat of a terrible weapon, a bomb powered by the very equation Einstein had uncovered, loomed on the horizon. In 1939, Einstein signed a letter to President Franklin D. Roosevelt. In it, he warned that Germany might be developing a nuclear weapon. He urged the US to begin its own research. That letter helped initiate the Manhattan Project, the race to build the atomic bomb. Though Einstein did not work on the bomb itself, he carried the guilt of that letter for the rest of his life. His warning had come from fear, not ambition. And when he saw what that fear had unleashed in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, his heart grew heavy. He had unlocked energy from matter, but he could not control how the world used it. By the time Albert Einstein settled into his new life in Princeton, New Jersey, he was no longer just a scientist. He had become a symbol. To many, he represented the very spirit of free thought, of reason in the face of chaos. And yet in exile, Einstein sought something much simpler, quiet. He moved into a modest home on a tree-lined street where he would live for the rest of his life. The neighbors often saw him walking alone, hands behind his back, his hair wild in the wind. He didn't own socks. He disliked fame. And he welcomed visitors only when the visits were sincere. In Princeton, he found space not only to think, but to breathe. At the Institute for Advanced Study, Einstein continued to work on what he called the unified field theory. His goal was almost spiritual in nature, to find a single, elegant equation that could explain all the fundamental forces of nature, gravity, electromagnetism, and beyond. He believed the universe was not random but ordered. There had to be a pattern, a symmetry, a deeper code beneath the surface. But the answer always danced just out of reach. While quantum physicists were busy embracing uncertainty and probability, Einstein resisted. "God does not play dice with the universe," he famously said. He didn't mean religion in a traditional sense. For him, God was more like the harmony of natural laws, the perfect logic of the cosmos. He could not accept that the universe was ruled by randomness. He wanted a universe that made sense. Outside of physics, he continued to speak up. He became an outspoken critic of racism in America, comparing it to the anti-Semitism he had fled in Europe. He supported civil rights leaders, condemned nuclear weapons, and refused to stay silent on matters of injustice. And yet, most of his days were spent in solitude, reading, scribbling equations, writing letters, listening to music, watching the seasons change from his study window. Some believed he had grown out of touch with modern science. But Einstein didn't mind. He was no longer chasing prestige or headlines. He was chasing beauty, truth, something deeper. In the quiet corridors of exile, he wasn't lost. He was still looking for the next mystery worth unraveling. Albert Einstein's final years were spent much like the rest of his life, in thought. He continued to rise early, take long walks, and fill page after page with calculations. His handwriting, still steady, curved across yellowed paper as he tried again and again to find the elusive theory that would unite the forces of nature. It didn't matter that younger physicists were moving in new directions. Einstein had made peace with walking alone. He often rejected fame, turning down honors, speaking invitations, even political power. In 1952, after the death of Israel's first president, Einstein was offered the presidency of the country. He respectfully declined, calling himself unfit for such responsibilities. I deal with equations, not people, he said. He preferred quiet over power, clarity over control. At home in Princeton, he was known to the locals not as a genius, but as the gentle, strange old man who wandered the neighborhood. Usually without socks, sometimes humming to himself. Children liked him. He would smile, offer them sweets, or ruffle their hair, and in return, they gave him the thing he valued most: freedom from questions. In private, Einstein's health began to fade. His heart was growing weak, but he refused surgery. He believed that life had a natural rhythm, and he would not interrupt it. "It is tasteless to prolong life artificially," he once said. "I have done my share. It is time to go." On April 17, 1955, Albert Einstein collapsed from internal bleeding caused by an aortic aneurysm. He was taken to the hospital where doctors offered treatment. He quietly refused. The next morning, April 18th, he passed away in his sleep. He left behind no grand farewell, no staged goodbye, just a stack of notes on his desk, scribbled equations from the night before. He had been working on his unified theory until the end, as if the universe might offer him one last glimpse of its secrets. His body was cremated in a private ceremony, and his ashes scattered in an undisclosed location. He had asked that no shrine be built, no grave to become a monument. He had always belonged to the cosmos, and in the end, he returned to it. The man who revealed the fabric of space and time slipped quietly back into it. Albert Einstein is gone, but his presence never really left. His ideas still ripple through time, quiet and profound, like echoes in a vast cosmic canyon. His name has become more than a name. It is a symbol whispered in classrooms, scribbled into textbooks, turned into jokes, questions, compliments, and even cartoons. But beneath the pop culture shadow lies something more meaningful, a man who never stopped asking why. He changed how we see the world. Not just scientifically, but philosophically. Before Einstein, time was a steady drumbeat, space a static stage. After him, they became flexible, fluid, woven together into a fabric that could bend, twist, and ripple. He helped us understand that mass and energy were not different things, but different faces of the same truth. That reality could look different depending on how fast you moved, or how closely you looked. Einstein taught us something quieter, something deeper than just formulas. That it's okay not to have all the answers, that imagination holds value. And that the universe is not only made of particles and math, but also of wonder. "The most beautiful experience," he once wrote, "is the mysterious. It is the source of all true art and science." He wasn't perfect. He made mistakes, struggled in relationships, and wrestled with regrets. But that made him more human, not less. He wasn't a cold genius in an ivory tower. He laughed, loved, doubted, cared. He spoke for peace when others stayed silent, stood against injustice even when it cost him, and never let fame silence his curiosity. Today, we still build on what he began. Satellites navigate using his equations, nuclear energy pulses with his discoveries, black holes curve space as he predicted, and far out in deep space, light from distant galaxies still bends, just as he said it would. As you lie there tonight, listening to the quiet around you, know this: the universe is still expanding, still unfolding, still full of questions. And somewhere in the whisper of stars and the curve of time, the spirit of Einstein lingers, smiling, always curious, always wondering what comes next. Sleep well, and keep asking why.